Greetings all. My name is Emma Jordan Simpson, and I am absolutely delighted today to bring you the Progressive Hour, Progressive National Baptist Convention in this conversation, and to be in conversation with three of my favorite people in the whole world. Today, we are going to be talking about the gospel and civic engagement. And I would encourage you to share this broadcast, to share information about this conversation on social media and with your friends. We plan to have a really good time. Um, the three people who are with me, I don't really need to give them an introduction, but I'm going to just a bit here. First, I have the Reverend Dr. Leslie Dawn Callahan, who is the pastor of the historic St. Paul's Baptist Church in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, and the mother of Bella. We are joined by the Dr. Melanie T. Price, endowed professor of political science at Prairie View University and author of The Race Whisperer, Barack Obama and the Political Uses of Race. We are so delighted to have you here with us, Dr. Price. And Reverend Tracy Blackman, the Executive Minister of Justice and Witness Ministries of the United Church of Christ and Senior Pastor of Christ the King, United Church of Christ in Florissant, Missouri. Again, today we are talking about the gospel and civic engagement. And you may have noticed that we are all Black women. And so we are going to be talking about the gospel and Black women and civic engagement. And again, I encourage you to share this conversation. So to sort of set the stage for us, this year, Esau McCaulley recalled in a piece he wrote for the Washington Post, Mrs. Fannie Lou Hamer's understanding of the gospel. And that understanding of the gospel that changed her life and compelled her to work for justice for her people. It was an understanding of the gospel wherein God was not just concerned about her body and her physical, well, God was concerned about her body and her physical well-being, and not just about her spirit and her salvation. And this gospel understanding that Mrs. Hamer had is characterized in this question that she asked in 1964 as she was trying to work with the Mississippi Democratic Freedom Party and to have them to be recognized at the Democratic National Convention. This was her question. Is this America, the land of the free and the home of the brave, where we have to sleep with our telephones off the hooks because our lives be threatened daily? Because we want to live as decent human beings in America. And so 58 years later, in 2020, many Black Christians carried a variation of Mrs. Hamer's question to the polls, which is Macaulay's contention. He says, is America the place that shoots Black women who are sleeping in their homes or uses pickup trucks to stalk Black men? How can we vote for hope and against terror, against the concrete policies designed to expand Black freedom? So PMBC has been since its conception, has proclaimed a gospel of hope and freedom grounded in the understanding of Jesus Christ as liberator. And historically, its congregations have prepared Black Christians to fight for concrete policies designed to secure civil and human rights and to expand Black freedom. And that's why this conversation that we're having today is so important. And I want to begin the conversation with Pastor Tracy Blackman, because Tracy Blackman said at one point, "I've never known the gospel outside of justice work." Now, Tracy, Pastor Blackman, 25 years of healthcare experience as a registered nurse, specializing in cardiac care. You pushed for systemic change in the largest health system in St. Louis, beginning with a mobile van targeting neighborhoods in need. You said, "I've never known the gospel outside of justice work," and that you do not preach a left, a progressive, or a liberal gospel. You preach the gospel. And so I'm hoping that you can just get us started off, if you would share some of your experiences doing gospel work.
Inviting me to be with this phenomenal group of sisters and letting me go first before they start getting started. uh, you know, my life has been always rooted in the church. I'm from Birmingham, Alabama. I'm a Southern girl. My grandfather was a Baptist preacher, and he was my first pastor. And my maternal grandmother was a church mother in the Church of God in Christ.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'm 57 years old. I didn't do daycare. I went to my grandmother's house when my parents went to work, which meant that I was in church in the daytime as a Baptist, and I was in church almost every night as a part of the Kojic Church. And so that's what I did. And so even listening to you talk about Miss Hamer, what came to my mind is that the preaching of the gospel in the Black church has always been an act of resistance,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Mm-hmm.
That the very preaching of the gospel, the understanding of the gospel from the standpoint that for many of our ancestors, they heard the gospel read to them, heard the Bible read to them,
Mm-hmm.
not just the gospel, in terms of a tool of oppression. And somehow this miracle happened that even outside of literacy, they were
Yes.
able to pull from a message of bondage, freedom in Jesus, right? And so in the Black church, long before we were getting multiple degrees, long before we reached this escalation of documented intellect, there was an intellectual presence permeating Black preaching, whether they studied themselves or whether it was inherited from people coming down. And that preaching had to connect God to us in a way that said we are somebody,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Mm-hmm.
And so when I say that I don't know the church, or I don't know the gospel outside of justice, it's because the gospel was used in my understanding of church to remind us in whose image we were made, and to remind us that what other people had to say about us and what other people thought about us had no power greater than the one who had breathed into us. That is my understanding. And with that understanding, I was taught an accountability to make sure that everybody in the church, everybody in the church was okay, right?
Mm-hmm.
And church by extension, like that's why I dated myself and said I'm 57 years old, because I grew up in a time in the South when church was not so much about fiefdoms, right? Church also was a method of survival.
Right.
So we didn't have money for daycare, and everybody didn't have a grandmama. So all the churches would get together and do vacation Bible school one after another to fill up the whole summer with somebody to keep the kids, right?
Mm-hmm.
So you might be in the Methodist church this week and you're
Right.
the AME Zion Church this next week, you're in the Baptist Church the next week. And so this sense of being responsible for one another, being accountable for one another, is deeply rooted in how I experience the Black church. And for me, the ultimate definition of justice is rooted in the Hebrew word, which is translated justice, yes, but also translated righteousness, right? And so a just church is a righteous church, and a righteous church is a just church. And to be righteous is to be in right relationship with God and with one another. And so they are connected for me. I don't know any other way to express it. And I'll stop there so I don't take up too much airtime.
Well,
that's what I mean by those statements.
I want to raise something that may be a little hairy for some people, but it is exactly what we are here to talk about. So, in this year, we have had two seemingly inopportune declarations by the largest denomination in this country, Southern Baptist denomination. The first was this declaration that possibly our ancestors, Harriet Tubman, may have been not in the will of God because she ran away from slavery. That was the declaration of the Calvinist Baptists who said that we're born into the state that we're born in, and that is God's will. And then after that, this declaration by 6 presidents of seminaries, Southern Baptist convention seminaries, who have in effect declared the lens through which we are viewing this gospel, and it's and hearing the prophets and hearing Jesus as not biblical, that we are not interpreting this gospel in the correct way. I see you shaking your head, Dr. Price. I want you all to weigh in on this, because these are two declarations that came as we are experiencing a pandemic, and as also we are watching the numbers of Black people, Black women, the numbers of deaths rising. So what do you tell me what you all think about that?
I go first because I'm not a
Yes, you
theologian
can.
or a seminarian. So I want to offer my answer up, and then they can offer something all, theologically correct. And so the first thing I would say is I think all of us, maybe not you, Reverend Simpson, but all the rest of us were raised in the South. And one of the things that Black Baptists know in the South, that when you say Southern Baptist, you don't mean them. And in fact, when you say Southern Baptist, it's antithetical to anything good for Black people. So whatever they say, I tend to try to believe the opposite.
Mm-hmm.
The other thing that I'll say is the problem with the argument that these Calvinists seem to be making is not to recognize that Harriet Tubman's enslavement wasn't the will of God.
Mm.
Right. And so if her enslavement wasn't the will of God, getting out of it was getting her closer to the will of God. And to start with the escape as the problem, to start with the self freeing as the problem, means that you don't understand what you're looking at in the first place, right? Like you're already starting at the wrong place. And so you're always going to get a bad answer if you're starting at the wrong place. And clearly they have. Now y'all say something smart.
I think that was pretty smart right there.
It is.
I go before Leslie. Let me just go before Leslie.
Okay.
You know what I thought about as you were saying that is that it's that old saying, there's nothing new under the sun, right? And what we're hearing from these presidents, we're hearing it, but they're not just saying it.
Right.
We're hearing it because whiteness has been liberated for the last 4 years to say what they've always believed, and what has been historically rooted in the soil of America. So we've heard this before. We heard it in the mid 15th century when Pope Alexander wrote the Doctrine of Discovery and said that white folk coming over into this land had the right to colonize and to annihilate indigenous people because they weren't as holy. They didn't have souls. They weren't created in the image of God. And the Southern Baptists are saying the same thing. Now, I know this isn't the question you asked, and I'm just going to hang it here.
No, go on.
But less concerned am I about what white folk who don't know the God I know have to say about me. Less concerned I am about that than these declarations of Black preachers who are now coming out saying, now we're going to denounce the Southern Baptists because we can't get with what they said about critical race theory, right? But all these years, they've been saying the same thing about women, right? It's not just critical race theory, it's women. And you could rock with them when sisters couldn't be in the pulpit, and when sisters had to have their place, and when sisters were not endowed with the very breath of God, just like you, right? Now all of a sudden, we want to celebrate and clap for those who are making their way out because God doesn't look like them. And I think that's something we have to deal with in our churches, because that is killing us. Right? What they're saying, my grandmother used to say to me all the time, baby, it doesn't matter what folks say about you. It doesn't matter what they call you. It only matters what you answer to, right? And so that's not new. But this notion that Black liberation for Black preachers, Black male preachers, does not include the liberation of the Black woman's voice is a problem. I'll stop here.
Yeah, we're either all going to be free or ain't none of us going to be free.
I believe it. So I actually want to go back to something that Melanie said, which is I think that's the place to start with the Southern Baptist Convention. How a thing starts and what it is tend to be very much related. I found that even to be true as a pastor. Churches have a kind of spiritual character and emphasis that if you know anything about how they started, you can be generations later and you can still see the vestiges. None of those people are still alive, but you can still see the vestiges of the very thing. It's like, you get a brand new trustee board, all new people, and they act just like the other trustee board. And you're like, how did that happen? How a thing starts usually has something to do with where it goes. And I think the things that have already been said about the theological predisposition of the Southern Baptist Convention and its direct connection to the social and racial dynamics in the convention, this should not be surprising to us. And at the heart of it is theological hubris. They actually think that they can sit around a table and determine what is and what is not inconsistent with the gospel of Jesus Christ. They think the gospel belongs to them.
Wow.
They think, and they especially think, and it sounds so familiar because it is. They especially think that theology belongs to them. Sort of the determination of the character of the gospel from a sort of systematic and orthodoxy, and from the perspective of systematics and orthodoxy. They think the thinking about the gospel belongs to them. They think that those determinations belong to them. And quiet as it's kept, and it's not, as Melanie's already said, it's not at all quiet to the Black folks. We say this part out loud when we hear Southern Baptist Church. But quiet as it's kept, this is exactly those assumptions, the hubris is exactly, they decided that Black people didn't have souls, so supposedly we didn't have any. They decided that Black people were, by providence, that they were to be in bondage and enslaved. They determined that their right, they made all of those decisions and then lived by them, and then told us, we shouldn't be surprised at all. Of course, they think that Harriet Tubman should not have been freeing herself.
I mean,
because their ancestors were the ones who were enslaving her.
No,
and so it is critical race theory, that the analysis of power that is present in critical race theory that exposes all of that. And Jesus said that people don't want things to come to light because their deeds are evil. Critical race theory is a systematized way of asking this question asking questions about power relationships. Of course, they don't want us to do that, because then we're going to start messing with their money. Then we're going to start messing with the mythology, their own narrative about themselves. Then we're going to stop, as we have already done, we're going to stop allowing them to think that they own knowledge in general and knowledge of the Savior in particular.
Amen.
They don't get to say what's the gospel and what's not. I wouldn't even have, and I'll say one last thing about it. I wouldn't even have known they said it if some Black people I listened to hadn't mentioned it, because I'm not checking for them or what they said. I would never have known, and I still don't care.
No.
Melody, you want to jump in here?
Oh no, I was gonna say that these are the same people who stood up in front of enslaved people and told the most radical story of a man who was executed by those in leadership for his own beliefs every week, and wondered why they self-emancipated, and wondered why they believed in justice and freedom. Like, literally, you think that we don't understand the words that you're sharing with us. And so at some point, Black people always learned to ignore white Christians of this ilk. That was the same in Harriet's time. That's the same in our time. So the best thing we can do is to ignore all of them and encourage other Black people we know to ignore them
to do the same. Now, I want to build on something, or you give us a good pivot point here. So you recently did a piece for the New York Times. This is not just a victory for Kamala Harris. And in that, you say that Black women are aware that all forms of oppression disproportionately affect Black women. And Black women's movements have always been inclusive, even when that inclusion was not reciprocated. Can you just build on that for us?
Yeah, well, we know if you look at any statistic, social statistic today, if you're going to look at sort of who is the least paid, if we use all the markers of value in capitalist America, that is payment, housing, security, health outcomes, education outcomes. If we look at all of those outcomes, African American women often find themselves on the low end of those statistics. Yet, if you look at who in families are more likely to be giving parts of their salaries to people in their family, if you look at who is tithing in any church in America, if you look at who is doing the majority of the caregiving in any particular kinship group, it's all Black women in the Black community. And so Black women have always known that they are interdependent with Black men. They are interdependent with Black children. They are some ways interdependent with white women, because the way people very rarely treat Black women better than they treat white women. So if you are pissed off about the way Black women are being treated and you think white women are to blame for that, then probably you should consider that we would never be getting whatever good treatment you seem to think it is that they're getting. And so when we think about all of these things, we know that when African American women form organizations, very rarely do African American women form movements that are exclusionary. Very rarely do African American women have somebody at the door saying, you can't come in if you don't have a dress on. You can't come in if you don't. Very rarely do African American women in their group say, like African American women in their group, they will be making food, they will be holding babies, they will be searching things up on the computer, they will be printing things out, they will be doing a million things in that meeting and still getting business done. Mm-hmm. And all of it benefits everybody in the community. Mm-hmm. They will still be holding plates back for some man. They will still be trying to figure out whether or not, if you have a male pastor, if he got his food in the study. They will be doing all of those things.
And a good piece
there's
of chicken,
never
right?
a time where African American women aren't including everybody. But every group I name, except for children, mm-hmm. all do things. They only allow women in their churches when it's Women's Day. That's the only time women come preach. They don't, I mean, my mother, she used to give talks, they used to call them when I was growing up, talks at churches. And she would stand down there on the little podium mm-hmm. down below the church. The only time women went into the pulpit was to clean it. And I'm saying those same women did all the work of the church. And that's true in politics, that's true in religion. And the thing that's so crazy is if you solve the problems of Black women in society, you actually fix it. Life for those other people get even better.
Mm-hmm. So what were the issues that were animating Black women and Black women's engagement just this year in this presidential election? Like, what was driving Black women to the polls?
I think it was a lot of things. I think, Black women when people get sick in families, it's Black women who are doing the caregiving. And so this healthcare crisis has meant a lot in terms of how much caregiving. When children were not in school because of the health crisis, it was often Black women who were there having to figure out what those kids were going to be doing, whether or not they were going to be able to go to school at all. African-American women were very upset with Donald Trump, sometimes more upset about what he was saying and doing about Black men than they were what he was doing about Black women, but they were very upset about it, right? I think also the idea of having an African-American woman in that slot mattered, probably not as much as all those other things. And so I think right now people have been in a state of chaos for the last 4 years, where you have a country that is run by a person who does photo ops holding Bibles upside down, who says stuff like 1 Corinthians, right? And Black women see it and they know it and they are like, this is not right. And they mobilize because of that, right? And I thought about this when Tracy was telling her story about her grandmother and all the things she learned as a child about church. And one of the things I learned, I have there's lots of women in my family. I'm the youngest of 5 girls. It's just lots of women around. And the thing that I learned quickly, and you see Black women doing this pretty much in every realm, and that is Black women solve problems by working. Their justice is action, right? And so whereas you have all these people who are sitting around like wondering what is happening, I'm going to sit out. Black women have never saw a problem. They never thought the answer to any problem was to sit it out. Not one. They get up, they start figuring out how to work, how to do. Oh, we don't have any food. What am I going to do to figure that out? They don't sit around and commiserate. They don't figure out, they don't wail about it. Sometimes they should take a minute to wail. But even in their wailing, sometimes they're moving. And so I learned early on that this is why I don't join a lot of churches, actually. I learned early on that to be in a church is to do work. To be in community is to do work. When you see people carrying things, you ask, can I help you carry that? If somebody brings bags into any house, groceries, I jump up and I say, look, can I carry some of them groceries for you? Because that's how I was trained to show affection, how to show that I value people, how to show that things are important. That's what African American women did in this election. They showed that they value their community. They showed that they value the people around them. And the way they did it was to say, look, ain't nobody around here perfect.
Mm-hmm.
I'm really just trying to stop this person who is there right now. And I would like to have the benefit of having a perfect candidate. I would like the benefit of having a candidate who I didn't have to think about whether or not white people would vote for them.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
But I don't have all of that. And what I know is this man cannot have a second chance. And so in that way, Black women are also very pragmatic. I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing, but what it means is when we get something, like when we get an issue that we aren't thinking about, they get on it. You don't ever want Black women, you want Black women to be supporting whatever it is you're on. You don't want them to be against it, because that's a whole nother campaign that you are not interested.
That when Black women are against you, you are against.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
Just give it up.
Oh my, oh my. I think that this also pivots us as well. And I want you to know, I wrote this down, justice is action, because that just resonated so deeply with me in many ways. That yes, it is the familiar posture. And I try to imagine, like, what would life be like if we could sit it out? If we could, what does June Jordan say? Sit down, break down, sit down, like everyone else does. And we really do not get a chance to do that. I want everybody, again, I'll just take this moment for folks who are listening in. I want you all to share this conversation as far and as wide as you can, and to use it in your own, to prompt your own discussions, because we know that the conversation doesn't end here, that what we're trying to do is to get you all to talk about these matters as well. I think Dr. Callahan.
Emma, can I say something?
I'm sorry. Please.
The thing I want to say is, I said that to say that Black women do a lot. But also the thing that I want to say is, I tell you this not because you think we are superheroes or because you should feel secure that we are Johnny Mays on the spot. But I tell you this to say that if you loved us, you would pick up some of the slack. Right? If you loved us, you would let us rest. If you loved us, you would not make us the pack mules of your communities, of your churches, of your institutions. Right? Not you. Like when I hear people say that Black women are the backbone or something, I just want to fight everybody. You're not the mouth. You're not even the butt that you rest on sometimes. You're none of that good stuff. You're just the little part that keeps us strong and moving and doing all the work. Now I'm saying that if you love Black women, when you see them doing too much, you don't have a program where you celebrate Sister Tracy, who sacrificed her health and her life to keep your church doors open. You actually see it when it's happening and say, why don't you sit down and let me do some of the work? Because Black women are exhausted.
I hear you channeling Melanie, Sojourner Truth, Ain't I a Woman?
Yeah.
And I hear you channeling Shaniqua Walker Barnes, Too Heavy a Yoke. Let's just encourage everybody who cares about Black women. Every preacher who says that they love Black women, you need to pick up Too Heavy a Yoke by Shaniqua Walker Barnes, Dr. Shaniqua Walker Barnes. That's good pastoral theology right there. You cannot pastor Black women if you do not pick up that book. We just going to declare that right now. Say that right now.
Amen.
I know a whole lot of folks, Dr. Callahan, listen to your sermons. I can name some of them, but I won't. I know a whole lot of folks who listen to your sermons, particularly young people, particularly young adults, millennials, maybe even some Gen Z folks, and you have been able to help folks, rationalize why make this decision to go to the polls at a time when what is this decision that we really are making. So, and you've been called pastor by many young people who will never make it to Philadelphia, but who listen to your sermons on the internet. And the Pulitzer Center chose the article that featured your leadership as pastor through the uncertainty of the coronavirus as one of their highlights of the year. And it captured the realities of the challenge and spirit of the voices of strong women. And I'm wondering, through the uncertainty of this coronavirus and through the uncertainty of this election season, and when we have people declaring their theological understandings of our humanity, talk to us about challenge and spirit of leading a congregation during one of the most tumultuous periods, really, of our recent memory.
So I want to shout out Erin Haynes, who is a journalist who wrote that piece. And I think it's actually significant. Erin came to know about me because when she moved to Philadelphia, her pastor, Joe Daniels, said, "That's your pastor. Go find her." So when Melanie was talking actually about the way Black women approach a problem, it actually put me in mind of what happened to me in late February, early March, when I went to Black womaning about the pandemic and what it meant to be the church in the midst of the pandemic. And I am really privileged. The saints at St. Paul's 11 years ago broke a mold that had been present for them as a congregation for 119 years, and they called me to be their pastor. And they have, from the day I walked in the door, even the folks who were skeptical, and I'm sure there were many, but even folks who were skeptical came along and really gave me room to figure out what being their pastor would mean. And they've come along. They help me to lead them. They allow me to lead them. And so part of the beauty of that is that when we got to late February, early March, when it was clear that I had started paying attention to what was happening in Italy and in Europe in particular, was listening to some of my favorite journalists and commentators who were starting to sound the alarm in venues like Twitter, especially, and on MSNBC. Chris Hayes was screaming at the end of February, in the beginning of March, "We are not paying enough attention to this." And I started to pay attention. And right about that time is when they started running out of ICU beds in Italy. And I realized, oh, that's a problem. And then it became clear it was going to be a problem here in the United States as well. And I immediately started doing what Melanie described Black women do, which is to say, okay, this is the problem, go to work. And so the thing that I talked to health professionals who are part of our congregation, public health professionals and scholars who are part of our congregation, and talked to our leadership team. And I said, okay, we're going to prioritize keeping people from getting sick. So what nobody is going to be able to say is they got sick at the St. Paul's Baptist Church. I don't have any control over what the president does, don't have any control of what the mayor does, the governor. But what I do know is I'm not going to be a part of spreading the coronavirus to the vulnerable members of the St. Paul's congregation. It won't be me. And I recognize that you can't make anybody do anything. And so I was clear that there might be somebody with a key to St. Paul's who was going to have church there. These things are possible. Some things happen when people have keys to the building. Melanie actually used to be the chair of our trustees at St. Paul's before she moved back to Texas. And so she can attest.
You put her to work.
And she worked so hard. She's a,
often trying to confiscate keys to the building. Like that was one of
that was one of her main jobs. So I knew that it was possible that people would not, people would not go along. One of the things that I recognize is that I don't control people. And so I'm not even trying. But I knew they couldn't make me go. And that I was not going to go. And then it became clear that the leadership team was in agreement and they were going to support. And so I'm like, okay, that door is closed. The door to the building is closed. What are the open doors that are present despite the closing of that door? Which is the other thing. I mean, that goes back to the thing that Melanie said about pragmatism. I feel like my pastoring is absolutely through the lens of Black feminism and liberation theology. I operate in the world as a Black feminist. And some of the defaults that I have in prioritizing care, in trying to see people's humanity, in trying to lead without controlling, in trying to be self-critical, in trying all of those things, I feel like come through that lens. And so my thing was, we can't do what we did. What can we do? We're not constrained. We're constrained, but we're not constrained in every way. Paul, I believe it was, says God is not bound when he was in jail. Okay, if we believe God is not bound, then what are the resources and capacities that we do have to engage in prioritizing care? And that meant prioritizing care for the members who, especially those who are going to be isolated, prioritizing care for our staff, in as much as we could keep people on staff and continue to pay them, so that, because they were still going to have to pay their rent, they were still going to have to eat. Whatever was true about, it's like, don't pay no bills. Pay the bills after you pay the people. Prioritize the things that make for care. And what I will say about that is that it allowed me to get very, very clear about my own life and ministry. I don't know that I've ever had more clarity as a pastor. It simplified my preaching. Like, I used to preach 40 minute arguments. I mean, they were spiritual arguments, and then I'd holler. I'm on social media. Ain't nobody gonna watch you for 30 minutes on social media, even if it's good. The genre is different. I know myself. I will be listening to somebody and enjoying it and be like, okay, that's enough, and turn to something else. It's the nature of so I'm like, okay, your sermons have to get shorter. The service has to get shorter. So I've never been clearer about what was required from me as a pastor. Take care of the people. And so for the last 9 months, I've been trying to figure out, okay, how do we do that better? Okay, is there somebody we're not hearing from? Is there somebody we're missing? Our deacons are calling our members every week. Is there somebody we haven't been able to reach? Is there somebody who can't get in on the call in? Is there somebody who we've got to find another means? Do we need to drive by the house? How do we take care of the people in the midst of this crisis? First, by not infecting them, by having super spreader events. How about that, church people?
How about that? How about that? I guess I want to put this question to all of you, but also maybe, if Pastor Tracy can lead us off on this one. So, given everything that we've been talking about, and given where we are and the road that you see ahead, what are the questions that that Black women of faith, Black Christian women need to be elevating right now? And what are the questions that we need to insist that the Black church elevate?
You ask that question, I hear Reverend Naomi Leapart in my head. She's begun asking this question that arrested me the first time I heard it. I wasn't sure we weren't going to hell for it. That's an inside joke. But she asked this question, do Black lives matter to God?
Mm. Mm.
And, you know, for those of us who are of the faith, of course, that is a rhetorical question, right? But
Sure.
But it is something to lift, because do Black lives matter to God? And if indeed they do, then how do they matter to us?
Right.
Right? I think that is the question for the church in general. How do they matter to us? How do we move in this moment beyond our obsession with whiteness and the displays of whiteness that we've seen recently, to self-examination and a public acknowledgement? And I like what Melanie said about justice being work and the church being work. So not just our confession, but our praxis of making a place of belonging for Black embodiments of God, right?
I'm getting chills.
I think that's our work. Because in this political structure, one of the things that has made it so difficult for the church is that we have stopped being a refuge for all Black bodies as embodiments of God. So we have these fiefdoms and fights among ourselves that, yes, Black women once again put aside to say, we got to get together just to get this out, right?
Yeah.
But now that that is out, and make no mistake, we're still going to have to push.
Yeah, for sure.
Every day, right? Melanie does not get a break. She's going to still be on NBC and ABC and, telling y'all, get this together, right? That's not going to happen. We're not going to get a break. But how does the church begin to heal itself and be who we need to be, and recognize the inherent divinity in all of Black bodies? And when I reach back to my youth, perhaps these lines of demarcation that I experience now were always there, but I didn't live them in the same way. I can't explain it. I always knew that I was loved in the church. And I always knew that women run it, even though they couldn't get in the pulpit, right? So I think that's the question we have to lift, that we have to strengthen ourselves and root ourselves and remember just how phenomenally and wonderfully made we are. and that we are not made that way simply for suffering.
Right.
Right. Right.
Don't have to be broken to be used by God.
Say a word.
How do we begin to do the work of dismantling that theological framing that we have embraced in ways that are strangling us?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I want to do that work.
I'll piggyback on that.
Yeah, please.
I think we have to ask. I think we need to leave as an open question the question of who we are leaving out. One of the things I think is happening to us that makes it particularly difficult to talk to certain groups, especially of younger people, is that we are unwilling to even hear them say we've left them out. And I think we've got to have as an open question that comes out of the deepest recognition that all of us have. We all have, there are things that we miss, and that our good intentions are not always enough. Like, I didn't mean, charge it to my head and not my heart and all of that. But sometimes we've done really injurious things that we didn't mean to do. And grown folks know that. Part of what it means to be a mature person is that you recognize that your impact and your intent are not always the same thing. And you own what happened, whether you meant to do it or not, whether that was what you were trying to do or not. And I think in the church, I think that's the question. Who is my neighbor? And who did I not count who is actually my neighbor? Who did I forget was my neighbor? Who did I miss? When I was driving down my neighborhood, what are the boundaries? Because what I hear the gospel doing is every time we think we know what the boundaries of the neighborhood are, Jesus is like, drive a little farther. You're like, that's the story. That's the story Acts tells. Didn't drive far enough yet. Didn't go far enough yet. And so I think the way we live that out now is really to say, and to hear people saying, and not, we don't have to be defensive about it. If we didn't mean to, we don't have to be defensive. We can just say, "Ooh, okay, gonna try to figure this out. Gonna try to do better.
Do it again.
Thank you for letting me know." Hit me. When people tell us, they honor us by thinking we can hear it and giving us a chance to hear it. And I think we can do better. Sometimes we may not be even able to fix it, but we could just hear it and not act foolish, like not act ridiculous and be jerks. So who am I leaving out is the question I think we need to elevate.
So, Melanie, if we're going to be serious about the question, do Black lives matter to God, and who are we leaving out, what does that look like as we are pressing for freedom and liberation?
As they were both talking, well, first I feel compelled to say that when she said, "Who is my neighbor?" I thought we were going to go back into what was like a 17-point sermon series. I feel like she preached on who is my neighbor for about 14 years. And I was only a member for 6 years. But also, two things that I often repeat that I heard at St. Paul's, which were not things that I had never heard before, but I heard in a different way. And one is, of course, the part of the Lord's Prayer that says, "The King on earth as it is in heaven," right? Which is meant to imply that heaven is not just for the waiting in the future, that we should be trying to create whatever we imagine that heaven to be in the place that we are now. And the other thing is about suffering, which Tracy mentioned, which I can't remember who said it first. You can tell me, Pastor Callahan. I have to say pastor in that context. You can tell me who said it, but it was like Jesus died on the cross, so we didn't have, so we don't have to.
Right.
Like Jesus never said, "Get back on the cross."
Yeah.
Not once. Never requested.
All of the womanists say it.
All
of
like,
the
you
womanist
know, and it's
theologians
like
say it.
I'm like, you are absolutely right. There's never a moment where Jesus says, every single one of y'all take up y'all's crosses or create crosses, build them, and then throw yourself up on it. And so when I think about what we need to figure out going forward, there are some people for whom this COVID moment has forced them to stop and slow down. And they are realizing how many things they were doing that didn't serve them.
Mhm.
It is my hope that when we go back to physical structures and we go back to churches and we go back to those things, that they continue to not do the things that don't serve them. And one of the things that I am thinking most about as a person who teaches, not just at a historically Black college, but at a historically Black college where 70% of the kids are Pell Grant eligible, where 60% of them are first generation college students. I am so consumed with the children for whom we believe this moment has been a real loss for them. That is, we might not never get them back. I am concerned for children in K through 12 who are missing 2 years of school now. And I think all churches should be thinking about when we're standing, whoever is left standing at the end of this racially hostile moment, at the end of this healthcare crisis moment, at the end of this economic devastation, how are we going to help the people for whom this moment has not just been the loss of this time, but it's going to mean more losses if we don't help them going forward? I think every Black church in America should be thinking about how they're going to do some kind of virtual summer school. How they need to be checking in with every single child in their church about whether or not they're logging on to school every day. Right? Because if you're in the first grade and you miss 2 years of school, you're coming up on some crucial years that you need to be able to get back. And so for me, I'm always thinking about who are the people who are losing most in this moment, and how are we going to build infrastructure to help them? How are we going to still see their humanity? How are we going to not blame single Black mothers who work and because they can't figure out how to get their kids online and they can't figure out the instructions? Because I have a whole PhD, and me and my nephew have been sort of working through some stuff on his school thing. And I'm telling you, I guess.
Right.
And so if I'm a person who has done all of this schooling and all this stuff, and I still have trouble understanding what's supposed to happen next, what about these essential workers, as we now call them, who work at grocery stores, who work 12-hour shifts, and who come home and then still have to do this for multiple children? And so for me, because I'm in education, that's the thing that I'm most worried about. But the thing that concerns me most in terms of the Black community right now is we have to figure out how to give each other the benefit of the doubt. We have to figure out how to love each other. When I say love, I mean accept people as who they are and not be so quick to talk crazy to one another, to not be so quick to count each other out, to see people's whole humanities and love them for it. And that's not an easy ask, but it's going to ask a lot of people to be different than how they are now.
One of the things that really helped me at the beginning of this pandemic, when, of course, like everyone else, I'm experiencing something I never thought that I would ever experience. So I read this piece by a woman, Arundhati Roy, an article called "The Pandemic is a Portal," and of course she talks about we've had pandemics, we've had global pandemics, and they are horrible, and but the opportunity in a global pandemic is if we see it as a portal, that we have the opportunity to let go of dead ideas, of dead weight, of the things, the ways of being that we know do not work, but we were doing them basically because that's what we do, right? All of these things, we have the opportunity to let those things go and step through this door of the portal to the other side lighter. And not just like for the purposes of being lighter, but the purposes of being lighter so that we have the energy, the strength, the bandwidth to build and imagine something new, to like, to build this world. And, one of the things that I have been saying, even in my own work, with the Fellowship of Reconciliation, is we're trying to imagine this world of peace. We've been saying, I believe another world is possible.
Yeah.
Right here. Like, this is
Right.
not something that, we need to wait for the other side for. Another world is possible. A world of equity and abundance, of peace, of love, where people have what they need to eat, that they have what they need for their bodies, that they have what they need for their communities. And I'm wondering, just in your imagination, because we're not even on the other side of this pandemic yet, but as you're imagining, what that world can be, I want you to talk a little bit about what do we need to let go and what can we build if we let some things go. And maybe we've already talked a whole lot about what we need to let go, right? What can we actually build to witness to the world that truly is possible if we would just let some of this stuff go?
I thank you, Emma. That Arundhati Roy article actually has been a pivot for 2 sermons at St. Paul's. Since you mentioned it to me, and you might have mentioned it to me, I think in June. It came out for those of you who are looking for the article, it was in the Financial Times. I think it was April 2nd of this year. And it's a really wonderful piece, and it for its encapsulation, maybe 3 sermons I've referred to it. One thing I would like us to let go of, that I think we have to let go of, and including in the church, is the notion that money is the sign and symbol and reality of success. The notion that monetizing everything, that I think we've got to let go of it. We are passing down a world to folks that's deeply askew. And it's really the notion of the church as a business. It's bad business. The elevation of the businessman, to me, is the same as the elevation of the strong man. It's part of how we got the 45th president of the United States. Like we've sort of sacralized business doing, business building. So I think we've got to let go of that, and it's literally killing us. And it makes it. And Jesus tells us. One of the ways I use that Arundhati Roy piece is Jesus says, "Come to me, all you who labor and bear a heavy load, and I will give you rest." And part of what I talk about in the sermon is we need the new world because we are burdened with the exact sorts of things that Arundhati Roy talks about as the burdensome nature of. She was talking about society in India and in the United States. And she's talking about the portal. It's too small to carry all this stuff through. And I couldn't help but think the eye of the needle in the rich person, right? I mean, like the resonances with the gospel, because the truth is the truth, and it's apparent in various places. So I think we've got to get past the notion that we can monetize everything, that success is measured by how many and how much. and we have to have a more gospel-centered sense of what our purpose actually is and the goal of well-being, and not riches and not these other trappings of success. I mean, the entire New Testament is about how that's not it.
What does well-being look like?
Stephen Ray says, smiling faces and full bellies. Theologian and president of Chicago Theological Seminary. I mean, that's pretty simple. Like people, a sense of kind of peace and joy and the kind of relaxedness that happens to a person's face when they smile. And the full belly speaks to the real material. There is a certain amount of well-being you cannot have when you're hungry and unhoused and uncared for. And so that's part of it too. But that's a basis for well-being, and it's not the same as monetizing your whole life and bigger, I'll tear down my barns and build bigger barns. I tell you, the whole New Testament is about this very problem.
We just read the Bible.
I really think we could actually get there. Actually reading the Bible. So yeah, that's what I think. I think we got to unload.
Pastor Tracy, what are you imagining?
Funny, Leslie and I have been having a good month. We haven't been arguing about anything this month. And tonight that continues. I was thinking what I would like to see us let go of is this theology of scarcity and the theology of abundance. They're both problematic. And began to embrace a theology of sufficiency. I've been thinking a lot. I launched in the denomination this medical buy campaign, and we've been buying medical debt all over. And lots of people with little money and lots of money call and they want to give money. Just before I signed on this call, I got a call to say, I'm willing. I have somebody who wants to give up to $200,000 for your campaign, right? And that's great. And I said, well, I have a problem because Mackenzie Scott gave $50 million to RIP. And I started there, Melanie. I started with this shout. And the more I thought about it, not because of her, this is not a critique of her, but the more I thought about it, it is ungodly
that you had
for someone to have. I mean, that's not what she has. That's what she gave, right? It's something like $67 billion. And what I know is that there is enough for everyone, and that we could all live sufficiently, and there could still be wealthy people.
Yeah.
It's not about everyone having the same amount, right? I dream of a world where everyone is sufficiently cared for. And I don't care that someone has more.
Right.
What is unacceptable is that some have none.
Right.
Right? And I haven't read this article. I'm going to go read it, of course, because you all are talking about it. But one of these things that this portal has taught us is that the portal is also not, it's not, it's not so small that you can just take yourself through it. Right?
Right.
If you have all the money in the world, if the hospital beds don't exist,
right,
you don't have a hospital bed. Right?
Right.
We have learned, even in this GOP, they had to bow and say, we have to send some money to everybody, because if we don't help those who have nothing, next we are going to see a decrease in what we have. in significant ways. And so I dream of a world of sufficiency. I also dream of a world that goes back to at least West African culture. That's the only part of the continent I've been to, so I can't speak for the rest of it, but of communal living, of taking care of one another, of village mentality. I dream of that for Black people. I dream of a world where we don't forget that we are connected.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I'm a nurse. And when women gather together, we have an increased secretion of the same hormones, oxytocin and serotonin, that we produce massively in childbirth and in pregnancy, because these are those elements that cause us to want to nurture and to bond. And when women get together, when we have our sister circles, we have that same release. When we are threatened, we come together and we work together because we have that same release. And that release for us causes us just to want to fight or flee. It also causes us to want to tend and befriend, right? I dream of a world where we take care of one another, whatever that means. What Mel is talking about. You're an educator. I've been yelling for the last 3 months. This should be a pass-fail year.
Right.
Nobody should be getting grades in the middle
And for some people with money, it is a pass-fail year. For some schools that are flexible, it is a pass-fail year.
You know, that's what I wish for.
I want to live in that world.
One of the things I tell my students is I am unnerved by any statement that implies you want to go back, you want the good old, you want any of that. The best days for Black people are always, in this country, are always tomorrow. Right? But there's the best day for Black people. We haven't had it yet. It's always coming tomorrow, which means that doesn't mean not to hold on to things that are important, not to hold on to family traditions. But anytime anybody says, I really want to go back to the good old days, and you ask them what year it was, you could be like, wait a minute, was 55? Do you understand? Like, they're all bad. And so one of the things that I am hoping is that when we emerge, when we come back together, that we don't just try to recreate what we had a year ago, that we don't step into we don't try to undo all this isolation by trying to recreate exactly what we had before March. It is my hope that we walk into this new life having learned new things about ourselves, maybe changing some of our priorities, maybe rethinking even some of our relationships, because some people you haven't seen, it turns out you probably feel better not having seen them. And so I'm hoping that when we come out of this, trying to live a different life. And for me, what that looks like for the church is, I'm hoping when we get back to our buildings, it ain't the same 3 people that are late at night trying to make everything run. Right? That's what I'm hoping. I'm hoping you're so happy to return to see other people that you actually start to see how sister so-and-so did everything and you ain't thought about her in 10 months. Right? And so then don't go back to relying on sister so-and-so to do everything when you know you can live without it, when you know it can be done another way. And so I'm hoping that I keep some of the things that I have learned about myself in this moment. I've started gardening. All of these women know, and now all of you will know, that I can't stop talking about it. Is the thing that is the most interesting thing I'm doing. I hope that when life opens up and I can actually go outside again, that I don't just let that garden grow over and go out for happy hour. Like, I'm hoping these kinds of things. And I hope it for everybody else too, as well.
Can I say something that I noticed that
You can say
speaks to
one
the
thing
world
because
I
we
want?
gotta close down.
Okay. I notice, I know all of you, you are all my friends. And I hope that you'll be able to say this about me as well. All of you cultivate warm, inviting, hospitable spaces. I've never been to Tracy's house, but I have been to, I've been on vacation with her several times. Um, I've been to Melanie's house. She makes wonderful pizza. Emma fries extraordinary chicken. Emma can go. And her cinnamon rolls, and she makes great coffee. And all of that, more than any of the, and it's food with all of y'all that's involved. It's always good food, and libations. But the thing but it's the cultivation of warmth and hospitality and the kind of comfort that I have when we gather that I think is church. And I miss that so deeply. I miss that gathering piece. Not the worship, because we can worship, but I miss the gathering and the little the stuff that happened in the trustee room counting the money, and the stuff that happens when we went out to brunch after church, and the conversations that you have. I miss praying at the altar and holding people's hands and hugging one another after a particularly difficult season. And I think that's the best of the church. And I think there's a piece of it that when we are really church, we cultivate even when we're not in the building. And all of you do that. And so I'm so grateful to be able to have this conversation with you. And I think that's the reason why Black women need to be acknowledged for the way we run things. You right, Tracy, we were always running it. And then we just put some, y'all go ahead and say it. And we just set somebody up in the pulpit who put on a suit and a tie. And everybody knew that they wasn't running the church. What I would like is for us to actually value what it is that we cultivate when we come together and when we are running things. And the ways that we always invite people in. You already said that, Melanie. Like, we're not trying to throw anybody out. We're not. But you can't, but the one thing I will say, you can't be the dude in the suit and you don't do no work. Like, if you want to be the figurehead now, you also have to do some of the work.
You sound like Miss Fannie Lou now.
Emma, may I ask us a question? I know we don't have time to talk about it, but it is something that we must start to think about. That when this ends, and it will end, when we come back together, there will be people missing.
Yes.
There will be over 300,000 people missing just from COVID.
Yes.
And there will be all of those who died from all the other illnesses, acts of God missing. And for 9 months, we have not just suspended our activity, we have suspended our grief. I feel that we must figure out ways to prepare to wail.
Right.
And to
yes.
And to be present in grief that I don't think we are thinking about. I think that we think collectively that it's going to be Easter and it's going to be Good Friday. And what are we going to do as churches?
You're right about it.
To prepare for Good Friday because we got to have Good Friday before we can have Easter. It is our task.
You know how I'm going to answer that? I'm going to put you all on the spot and say that we are going to have a part 2.
Yes.
We're going to have a part 2. And I say that because since this experience began for me, when I get up in the morning, I'm in tears. And when I go to bed at night, I'm in tears. And in the middle of the day, what I'm doing is trying to work for the world that I know is possible. I've been doing what Melanie says, that, you know, this justice is action. But grieving, no space for that. No space to grieve. And we already know what kind of world shapes people to not have room and space to acknowledge their loss and their grief. And that's not the world that we imagine. That's not the world that we want. And so I'm putting you all on the spot to say we are going to have a part 2, because that is the natural progression of this congregation. Is what are we going
I
to
want
do
to say
about
too,
that?
and when we do, I think we need to have a real conversation about what Easter's like in the Bible.
Mm-hmm.
Easter is actually filled with grief in the
Mm-hmm.
Bible.
Mm-hmm.
Even after they realize Jesus is alive,
Mm-hmm.
the disciples are deeply troubled because they haven't, the trauma
Yeah.
of
But
what
don't
has
give it away.
happened.
Don't give it away right now.
Write
Don't
it
give
down.
it away
Write
right
it
now.
down.
Don't give it away.
I mean, but there's some trauma that happens.
Yes.
That
There's
and
some
it actually,
Emmaus Road. There's some all of that.
that's right. They are traumatized.
They're
And in that way,
traumatized.
Tracy, I would say that it actually will be more like biblical Easter, where
Mm-hmm.
you're like, okay, I think I have something to celebrate, and yet I'm still trying to process all the trauma.
Well, we're going to have to tell people, though, how to do that, because you know that's not how we do it.
No, it's
That's
true.
not how we do it. We rush right
Am I gonna
over
have to help y'all
Good
tell people
Friday.
this too? I feel
Yeah.
like that's out of my depth. Y'all probably should fill in an actual preacher in that slide.
Oh no.
Oh no, because there's some work that we need to do in that period too. So here's what I want to say. First of all, thank you to the Progressive National Baptist Convention. I want to say thank you to our president, the Reverend Dr. Timothy Stewart, for this opportunity, for this platform, for the chance for us to come together to have this conversation. I'm hoping that people will share this discussion, that they will use it as their own discussion prompts. I am hoping that PNBC's Progressive Hour will continue to help people raise these kinds of questions about our personal lives, our spiritual lives, our political lives, and understanding that we have one life. We have one life, that we're not who we are on Sunday and then someone else on Monday. We have one life, and all of that is God's sacred concern, is our sacred concern. So I'm really grateful. I'm grateful to have this, just a very selfish pleasure to have the opportunity to talk with you all. So thank you. And part 2 is on the way. Part 2. Thank you.
Thank you, Emma.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for inviting us to have this conversation.